Okay, I think it's time to get started. I'm one of those people that likes to be pretty well on time. My name is Donna Reiner. I happen to be the Secretary Treasurer of the Arizona Preservation Foundation, one of the co-sponsors of this webinar. These webinars started during COVID, and we have decided to continue them, and we're managing to have them more frequently. And we hope that they are topics which you will find informative, useful, and because they are being recorded, in the chat, you can find where the link will be, where you can find any of the previous ones which you weren't aware of or want to see again. Again, welcome. This is an exciting time. February, it's crisp. At least in Arizona, it's crisp. The sun is out. That's good too. And for some people, you know, the weather is not quite so nice. But this project that you're going to hear about in more ways is going to be something that I believe, and all of those of us who live in Arizona and are aware of it believe it is one of the most exciting projects and things to do to help forward the transfer of information regarding our history. I will now turn this over to Margaret Hangen, who will introduce all of our presenters, and then we'll actually begin the show. All right, Margaret.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Hagen. I'm actually currently the detailed regional archaeologist for the Forest Service. And I was going to briefly go through our presenters. We have quite a group of presenters, and I'll briefly read their biographies so you know who's presenting, but they also will present their names as they go through their presentations. My apologies, my internet is very weak, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off and present our presenters. And this will be in order. Our first presenter is Helen Erickson. She teaches preservation planning at the University of Arizona. Her area of specialization is analysis and documentation of historic landscapes. Projects include work at Chiricahua and Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, Fort Bliss, and Camp Navajo. Helen is the national liaison for the American Society of Landscape Architects and Historic Preservation, Historic American Landscape Survey, and she serves on the Tucson-Pima County Historical Commission and the Armory Park Historic Zone Advisory Board in Tucson. She received her Master's of Landscape Architect and Heritage Conservation Certificate from the University of Arizona. Our next presenter will be Sarah McDowell, who is a graduate student in the Master of Urban Planning and the Heritage Conservation Certificate program at the University of Arizona. She has a background in interior design and a focus on historical design. Her major historic preservation interests include sustainable rehabilitation and preservation community character. And recent research projects have included the historic Bolt at Capitol Reef National Park and the Mission 66 landscape at the Chaco Cultural National Historic Park. She was the principal author of the Camp Naco Historic American Landscape Survey completed in July of 2021. Our next presenter is Carlos Lobo Bazan. Lobo has retired twice, once from the military after 20 years in 1993, and subsequently from serving the federal government for over 19 years in information technology, data security, and contracting. Not content to sit around, he acquired a motorcycle and began to explore. One of his early discoveries was Camp Naco, which he immediately recognized to be a military facility. In short order, he became one of the camp's strongest supporters and a member of the Naco Heritage Alliance. He also serves as the secretary of the Sierra Vista chapter of the National Association of Buffalo Soldiers and Trooper Motorcycle Club. The next presenter will be Crystal Carrancho. Crystal is a historic preservation planner with the City of Phoenix Historic Preservation Office. She earned her BA in anthropology from the University of Arizona. And prior to working in historic preservation, she spent a decade working for the state of Arizona as an archaeologist. And enthusiastic about Arizona history, preservation, and GIS, her collaborative work on the preservation, the Phoenix Ethnic Heritage Story Maps was garnered recognition for the Preservation Historic Preservation Office, including the Best Story Map Award at the 2020 AGIC Education and Training Symposia, and a Governor's Heritage Honor Preservation Award at the 2021 Arizona Historic Preservation Conference. Next presenter will be Gerald Lamb. Gerald is a historian and filmmaker. He earned his BA and MA in history from Northern Arizona University, where he developed a passion for public history through participation in the creation of the Martin Springer Institute's travel exhibit Through the Eyes of Youth, Life and Death in the Bedzin Ghetto. During an internship at Lowell University, he co-created the Space Guard Academy Science exhibit. At the Vail Preservation Society's special project curator, Gerald directed the 2018 documentary Voices of Vail, which received the American Association for State and Local History Albert B. Corey Award. He currently teaches history in South Mountain Community College and produces the local history web series Vanished Vail. Finally, our final presenter will be Jenna Leveille, who has been learning, practicing, and teaching GIS for almost 20 years. Currently, she serves on the Arizona Geographic Information Council, the Arizona State Board on Geographic and Historic Names, and is past president of the National State Geographic Information Council. In her role as deputy state cartographer, Jenna coordinates, provides leadership, and facilitates AGIC activities and coordinates statewide GIS. So I will turn it over now to Helen, who will introduce our topic.
Okay. Let me get this started. Good morning. I am Helen Erickson, and it has been an amazing pleasure to work with this team to develop a story map for Camp Naco. I myself rediscovered Camp Naco in the spring of 2021. I had driven by there a number of times, but actually all I knew about it was the information developed by the folks at Archaeology Southwest. And that had been published in 2006, excuse me. Okay. Got a new system here. As a brief introduction for those of you who aren't familiar with Camp Naco, it was staffed by members of the segregated Black military during the course of the Mexican Revolution, or perhaps I should say revolutions, during the first 20 years of the 20th century. Their assignment was to ensure that the Mexican conflict did not spill over into the United States. Camp Naco is located in southeastern Arizona within sight of today's border wall. Naco, Arizona is the sister city of Naco, Sonora, a rather larger community across the border. Camp Naco was situated at the point where the railroad crossed over to link the smelting operation in Douglas with the mines of Canada and Mexico. Sorry. It's a new system here. Today, Camp Naco is surrounded by a chain link fence to protect it from opportunistic vandals. The question that struck me was how to share the story of this amazing place with the world outside. We settled on the idea of using a story map, which could be accessed by passersby as well as by people exploring the history of Arizona, including the all too often hidden history of the contributions of Black Americans. It would be available on a tablet, a smartphone, or a computer. Arizona Humanities agreed to fund our project. We assembled a team and began work in January 2022. While a half dozen people worked on the story map directly, over 50 members of the community, including the City of Bisbee and the Arizona Preservation Foundation, contributed to the work. AZGO offered an online home for the story map. What you see on this slide is the sign we installed at the camp last fall. The QR code provides a direct link to the story map. When the camp is open to visitors on visiting days, the story map offers an on-demand tour of the site. Even in its incomplete form during the first half of 2022, the story map contributed to the selection of Camp Naco as one of the National Trust's 11 most endangered historic places for 2022. The resulting publicity brought Camp Naco to the attention of the Mellon Foundation, and it also supported a grant application to the governor's office. And while the story map itself has picked up a number of awards, the real test of its value was its contribution to achieving funding for Camp Naco. Over $8 million to rehabilitate the buildings and create an innovative program for arts, scholarship, and community outreach. Now, some of our team will provide an overview of the separate elements that made up the story map. Sarah, our historian and photographic researcher, will go first. Sarah?
Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of historical context to the border in general, as well as why Camp Naco was kind of located where it was. So starting off, we're kind of looking at a historic picture of the border. This is an obelisk that was established to, or that was placed to establish the original border. A little bit of context, the Arizona border was kind of in flux for a while when the US first got the territory. The border was set north of the Gila River, but after the Gadsden Purchase, they acquired the southern part of Arizona in 1854. So these obelisks were placed to establish that border, but otherwise it was a pretty vague border. So we can go on to the next slide. So Arizona had some really big industries around the turn of the century. They're often referred to as cattle, copper, and cotton. In Southern Arizona, copper was definitely the biggest industry. The copper mining was first established in 1877 near Mule Gulch, but the Queen Copper Mine in Bisbee, which is just about 10 miles north of Camp Naco, was definitely one of the biggest copper operations in the region. Cotton and cattle were also very large industries. Cattle ranching was established by the Spanish in the 1500s, and Americans first struggled to get the ranching established because of the Apache raids, but once they got it established, it was a booming industry in the region. At one point, there were more cattle than there were people in the state. And then cotton was a huge cash crop for the region. Many of you might see Pima Pima cotton, and that was established here in Southern Arizona. So that's a little historic context. We can go to the next slide. So this is an image of one of the Bisbee smelters. Just to kind of give a reference, it was a huge operation. As Helen mentioned, there were mines both in the US and in Mexico. US mines were obviously all run by US companies. The Mexican mines were run by both the US and Mexican companies. We can go to the next slide. This is an image of the American Customs House in Naco. So a lot of industry was moving through this little kind of small in comparison to what we see at the border nowadays, but it was definitely an important operation. So yeah, next slide. But there were a lot of conflicts along the border as well. So this is an image from Naco, Sonora, of a train car that's been wrecked during the Mexican Revolution. So there was a lot of conflict, a lot of fear that these conflicts would come into the US. So even though originally Naco was not going to be one of the areas where troops were going to be stationed, the local entrepreneurs and businessmen really pushed to have the camp stationed in Naco to protect their assets and the border area. Next slide. So a big thing in the border is bandits, cattle rustlers, immigrants, oh my. So there was a lot of kind of fear in southern Arizona for all of these kinds of things. Definitely the biggest ones historically were hostile Apache tribes, but by this time that was really kind of resolved. So then the next thing that people were really worried about were these bandits and outlaws, and we can jump to the next slide. So these are a few news clippings from the local paper in Naco and Bisbee. The one in the center is a hotel claiming to have bulletproof rooms, which we all find hilarious because this hotel had stray bullets flying over the border during the Mexican Revolution that did not penetrate the building. So they got to advertise for that. So it really just shows there was a lot of activity, a lot of hostility in this region. Next slide. So these are some images that Americans might see of Mexico during the Mexican Revolution in kind of border regions. You can jump to the next slide. So it's definitely kind of creating this narrative of these kind of Mexican bandits causing havoc and creating the fear in the US. Next slide. And I do want to recognize that the term bandit is a derogatory term, and it is now considered fairly racist. So they are just, it's a term used for Mexican outlaws. But there were similar practices being done on both sides of the border. Next slide. This is just an image from some cattle ranching. So at the time, cattle rustling was definitely a big practice. Outlaws would come from both sides of the border, chase cattle up across the border. Once they crossed the border, the pursuing ranchers could not cross and continue pursuit of the cattle rustlers. So this was a common practice on both sides of the border by both US and Mexican cattle rustlers. Next slide. So talking a little bit more about the industries in the area, it was very fueled by an immigrant workforce. The immigrant workforce was both Mexican and Eastern European. You can go to the next slide. And while these were vital parts of the economy, they did experience discrimination. Next slide. A big example of that is the Bisbee deportation in 1917. Allegedly, this was an attempt to break strikes by the industrial workers of the world, the IWW, at the Queen Copper Mine. But when you look at the records, over 80% of the people deported had either Mexican or Eastern European last names. So it was clear that there was a bit of a drive for who they selected to deport. So what they did is they round everyone up, put them in these box cars on a train and ship them out to the middle of the desert in New Mexico and drop them all off. So it was a very, very bad time. But they definitely were kind of playing with fire of, do they want to preserve these relations with their major workforce? Or do they want to get rid of them and prioritize who they thought were going to be a better worker? And in some circumstances, they did the wrong thing. Next slide. So this kind of leads to the establishment of this human border, as it was often referred to. So during the Mexican Revolution, the US War Department decided to set up tent camps along the US-Mexican border. A lot of these forts and camps were manned by Buffalo soldiers, but not exclusively. When the Buffalo soldiers were serving there, there would be no other white soldiers because it was very segregated at this time. But the Buffalo soldiers did gain a lot of respect and renown during this time serving along the border. Next slide. So this is another article from the Bisbee Daily Review in 1919. This is after World War I, when the US had a little extra funds. They decided to establish this border more permanently. So historically, it was all tent camps, but at this time they decided to set it up with permanent camps. And you can see where Naco is roughly. I don't know if Helen can like move her mouse around it. But it's between Nogales and Douglas and just a little south of Fort Huachuca. So it is a very strategic location. But the border ran from Arvaca, Arizona to, I can't remember actually where it ran in Mexico. Do you remember, Helen?
The border basically ran from California, Yuma, where it goes into California, and Brownsville.
Brownsville, okay, I forgot, yeah, Brownsville, Texas. I just forgot where the last one was. So you can go to the next slide. So yeah, so the Buffalo soldiers did play a major part in this region. They served with distinction. During this time, they did not really experience any conflict on the border. They were not actively fighting. You can go to the next slide. They were mostly just maintaining the border, doing drills in preparation of the chance that they would go into World War I. So practicing building trenches, setting up barricades, setting up hay bales. You can go to the next slide, where you can see one of the hay bales that was built to stop stray bullets from entering the camp. This slide referred to it as a machine gun camp. So this is that, so they would be practicing using new advanced machinery. Next slide. Here's another image of them digging trenches in Douglas. So the activities, while they were always busy, they never went directly in conflict with the Mexican troops and were there mostly just to be a presence along the border, run drills, make sure the conflict didn't spill over. Next slide. Here's another image of some of the hay bales that were built and established with white officers posing on them. It will be said that this was not an ideal location to be serving. It was very rough conditions. We all know Southern Arizona, they were living in tents, and the Buffalo soldiers were stationed here because it was the least glamorous. So they definitely did not have the ideal posting, but they did serve very well in the region. Next slide. So a little bit more about the battle, or about the Mexican Revolution itself. There was one major battle in Naco, Sonora. So this was between the federal forces and the rebel forces. The Buffalo soldiers were stationed at the camp and set up along the border. Next slide. Were set up along the border to stop any of the conflict from spilling into the US, but also to prevent US spectators, you can go to the next slide, from coming into line of fire. So this is an image of spectators coming to Naco to watch the battle because they didn't have Western TV at that time. So this is what they were doing for entertainment. And the Buffalo Soldiers had to keep them from coming to harm or moving too close to the conflict. Next slide. In the end, the US did stop the conflict, or not the, sorry, the US did not stop the conflict, but when the troops did run into the US to surrender, the US took control of them, took them to Fort Huachuca, and took all of their weapons and things. Next slide. So one of the big things that happened in this region was the whole participation of Germany. Many of us don't know that Germany was really kind of playing a role in the region, but we can see from propaganda image of the time that these little snakes all have the German helmets. So there were many attempts by the Germans to supply guns to the Mexican Revolution, both sides of the Mexican Revolution. There were German emissaries who worked for Mexican officials. And then one of the biggest conflicts was the Zimmerman telegram, which next slide. So this was a telegram that basically stated that if Mexico agreed to back Germany in the war, that Germany would come and help Mexico take back territory from the US after the war. The only problem is they also made this promise to Spain, saying that they would help Spain take back Mexico. So they were telling everyone big lies. But this telegram was intercepted by the English government, and they sent it off to the US to say, hey, Germany's making plots against you. And it was a major part of why the US entered into World War I. Next slide. A lot of people kind of think like, oh, the Mexican Revolution, it was just the like little skirmishes along the border, but no, they were a major established military. Next slide. And they looked the same as any European or American military of the time. They were advanced, they were well put together. So there was a reason that the US kind of did have a fear that Mexico could turn against them. Next slide. So a little bit about the layout of Camp Naco. This is not a fort. It is a camp to house cavalry units, and its location near the border is definitely kind of its strategic location. It is laid out by cardinal directions, which is how all forts were laid out at the era. The camp consists of these two quadrangle grouped common areas with barracks on either side and a mess hall in the back. The commissioned officers' quarters sat across what is now a road, and non-commissioner officers were placed along the side of the camp with parade grounds in between the buildings. Next slide. So this is an image of the non-commissioned officers' quarters. And for many years after the camp was decommissioned, these were used as housing for local residents in the area. Next slide. So here's an image of the site plan, just to give you a better idea of what we're talking about. I think Crystal will go over this a little bit more when we go into the story map, or if you go through the story map, this is broken down in more detail. Next slide. So this is one of the last pictures of Camp Naco before it was decommissioned. So this is taken from a water tower looking over the camp. Most of these buildings are still here to some degree, or at least the profile of them are still there. Next slide. So Camp Naco was closed or decommissioned in 1923. A handful of the border camps were being decommissioned at this time because the conflict in Mexico had ended, and they decided that peace had been negotiated with Mexico, so they didn't need to keep the camps open. Camp Naco was unique. It was left intact because it was built out of adobe, whereas most of the other camps were built out of surplus materials that the military owned and were dismantled, and the materials were repurposed. After Camp Naco was abandoned by the military, the Civilian Conservation Corps took over the area and lived there through the 1930s. And that is the end of my, thank you guys.
Okay. Lobo. You
Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is. I don't know where everybody is at. My name is Carlos Bazan. Go ahead and go to the first slide, Helen. I am a military retired, and my passion, my reason for being here is I am a soldier and a soldier for life. So I can identify with what this troops went through, and probably to today, they're still going through some of this. This camp here is a very close and dear piece of history to me, simply because of the soldier aspect. This is where they lived. This is where they ate, bathed, cried, suffered, cold, hot. It really made no difference. But this camp here was, essentially, it was a transition point back and forth between soldiers that went across the borders, or not across the borders, along the borders, from all the way from Douglas, speaking of Arizona, Douglas, Camp Jones, and then you got Naco, and then you got Huachuca, Loquil, Arivaca, Ruby, and all the way up toward the California border. There were some multitudes of camps up there. However, this camp here is the only one that I know of, and I've been along the border, that is still standing. It's got approximately 17 or so buildings. Next slide. 17 or so buildings, a couple officers' quarters. This is an officer's quarters right there. There's 4 more, but they're in bad repair. Some of them have the roofs that are collapsed. Next slide. And this one here is the hospital. This is where Mr. Newell and Miss Newell lived for a considerable amount of time, until, of course, they got old and passed away, and then the city of Huachuca City took over the post, or the camp, and then eventually it made it all the way back to the city of Bisbee. Next slide. This right here on the right hand side, that is one of the officers' quarters that is in bad repair. The one on the left is the remains of a dining mess hall facility and a troop barracks. Those are the corners that are still standing. Not much left, but we're in the process of doing some repair and bringing these things back to life and making it look like, hopefully, as close as possible to the original designs. Next slide. These are some of the volunteers that we had when I first started with Camp Naco, coming out there and doing weed whacking and cutting and picking up trash and making the place look halfway decent and presentable. These are members of my motorcycle club that got involved with Camp Naco back in 2020, 2021 in that neighborhood. Next slide. These are also volunteers, the ROTC, then right there it says 2020. They have been instrumental in helping us picking up trash and dressing up the place a little bit to make it look presentable to the public and whoever wishes to stand at the fence line and take a look and admire some of these buildings. Next slide. This is me with my tractor. I brought it over to the compound to mow outside the fence line and also to mow some of the inside areas of the camp. Next slide. Again, more volunteers. The ones in the gold are soldiers from the motorcycle club, the Buffalo Troopers. The other ones are kids that did the ROTC and came out there and helped us out. And in the middle right there in the purple shirt right there, that's Becky Orozco. a wonderful friend, and an avid supporter of Camp Naco. Next slide. You know who that is. It's obvious. Next. These are the soldiers of my club, of my motorcycle club. They were out there a considerable amount of time. We spent a lot of time in Camp Naco. Some of them are already gone and went to other places, not gone, but you know, they moved on to other places, locations. So there's only a handful of us left. I'm standing in the background in the back. So next slide. This is our sergeant at arms from the motorcycle club. He was standing guard, I suppose, watching the activities there at Camp Naco. Camp Naco is comprised of approximately 17 or so acres of property. It varies. It depends on who you ask. 17 supposedly is about right, and about 17 or 18 buildings left. And there's a gentleman that is on the web thing here, and he probably should be able to say a couple of words. Mr. Jeffries is on board with us. He's been hired by the city of Bisbee to oversee the restoration of Camp Naco. Camp Naco is a place that is, in my opinion, is sacred ground due to the fact that many hundreds of soldiers passed through or stayed at Camp Naco between 1910, 1913, and all the way to about 1927, when the military decided that they no longer needed to post. Next slide. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I got to say. I got a whole lot more, but time is limited. Thank you.
Crystal.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Carrancho, and I'm here to talk to you about story maps, what they are, how they can be used, and also show you how to get started on your own. As Margaret mentioned earlier, I work as a historic preservation planner with the City of Phoenix, and through that role, I had the opportunity to work on the City of Phoenix's ethnic heritage story maps, which helped prepare me for my role with the Camp Naco story map. We'll take a closer look at both of those story maps a little bit later, but I just want to get started with a general introduction of story maps. And so story maps is an ESRI tool. ESRI makes ArcGIS, ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online. They have many applications, but generally this is GIS software. Story maps can be used to share and publish stories online, integrating maps and GIS data along with narrative information, lists, charts, audio, video, and photographs and other images. With a story map, you publish your story online and you would get a unique URL. So you can share your story map just with a small working group, or you can share it with the general public and everyone can look at it. And there are other ESRI tools that can produce great web pages and apps, but a story map is a wonderful tool for various types of storytelling. And it's easy to navigate for as a user because you can scroll through at your own pace. Next slide, please. Oh. Okay. And so to get started, you do need an ArcGIS Online account. If your work organization uses ArcGIS Online, potentially you can request an organizational account through your GIS or IT team if that's something that they support. For the Phoenix Ethnic Heritage Story Maps I worked on, our Historic Preservation Office worked directly with our GIS team, and they coordinated with the city's enterprise team to offer the technical support for that. If you're working on your own or you're just curious to explore, you can create a public account for free. There are limitations to a free account, of course, but you can access the Story Maps application and most of its main features. And so for the Camp Naco Story Map project, we were able to collaborate with AZGeo and utilize ArcGIS Online accounts through the AZGeo Hub. You'll hear more about AZGO a little later in the presentation. But next slide, please. And if you're logged into your enterprise account, you may have a waffle menu icon on the top right that looks like the image on the left when you open it. And you can see the story map icons there with the red arrow. And through a public account, I find that it's easiest to sign in directly through the story map specific web page, which I show there on the right. And that will take you to the story maps web page. So I will take over and share my screen right now. And so you should all see my story map account. So I'm logged in through my AZGO account. And so once logged in, this is how your main page will look. You probably won't have any story maps there, definitely. But this is how it looks. Up here on the left corner at the top, you can see there's the stories. You have collections, which if you start making more stories and you want to group them together, you can create collections. And there's also themes. Themes are only accessible through a subscription, so not all of you will have that if you do use a free account, but if you do pay for an annual subscription, you can create your own themes, choose your own fonts, colors for the fonts, colors for backgrounds, and so there's more opportunity for creativity with the color schemes and fonts. I also want to point out these quick links. These are fantastic. Once you get started with your story map, you'll definitely want to reference these and view all of them. And so you can see you can explore stories through the gallery. Get Started is a great collection of story maps. The latest news, monthly, the ESRI blog updates you on all the new features or bugs that they may have fixed. And there's always something great and new that they're developing for story maps that allows you to do more things when you're working with this application. And then there's story planning, which is critical to everyone trying to start a story map, is you want to make sure you plan it well. And I'm going to try and show you some of these web pages, and if you can bear with me, I'm kind of blocking my tabs with this share screen from Zoom. So I'll go ahead and show you just quickly. So again, as I mentioned, this is a collection of story maps that tells you everything you need to get started. I'll briefly go over some of these things, but once you start working on your own story map, definitely reference this. I believe I shared this link with Alicia, and so she can share that with all of you. But it lets you know just about everything you'd want to know once you start working through and start planning your story map. Another link, Getting Started. Again, I'll go through this. If you can't take notes, if you don't want to watch through the whole video again, you can just pull up a story map that's really going to walk you through a lot of these steps. And then that planning article that I mentioned, this is a blog post, but the Camp Naco team and we referenced this directly, and we must have had, I think, at least 3 distinct versions of an outline that we worked through as we were working on this project and trying to find our audience and find our focus and how we wanted to convey this story about Camp Naco and the Buffalo Soldiers. And so let me get back to this, and then this next link is the ESRI Gallery. This is a great resource. You can view other story maps here and get ideas and inspiration for your own story map. There's a variety of story maps, from environmental stories to culture and arts. There's stories that focus on data, while others use audio and video to tell their story. So there's a lot of creative ways that people are using story maps right now. So it's always a great idea to look at other stories and get ideas of what types of formats or features could work in your own project. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Specifically, I'm going to show you ones that I had the pleasure of working on. To start off, I'd like to share the City of Phoenix's ethnic heritage story maps, just to kind of briefly go over this. This was a collection of story maps that Phoenix's Historic Preservation Office put together, utilizing 3 historic property surveys that they had consultants complete in the mid-2000s. So they had reports for Asian American heritage, African American heritage, and Hispanic heritage. And this information had been published online. It was made available to the public, but the City of Phoenix Historic Preservation Office wanted to present the information in a more interactive way, and reshare these hidden parts of history and lesser known things. So I'll just kind of scroll through a bit to just show you how this story map looked and how it was organized based off of these historic property survey reports. Just scrolling through, for this project, we were initially going to make a paper driving tour map. As you can see, this is a very spread out part of Phoenix. That wouldn't have been the most feasible thing for individuals to drive around, but with COVID in the beginning of the pandemic, we opted for more focus on this online format, which proved to be the right decision. And it made a lot of this, greater part of the city of Phoenix accessible to individuals from their homes. But just taking a look at this African American heritage story map, you can see there's GIS maps with clickable points. We also utilize photographs. There's other things like historic newspapers. So it's just a lot of different ways to show information about these different properties in Phoenix. And having a survey report that was prepared and organized in a specific way influenced the way that we organize the story map. And I say we, as the office, I worked with another planner to gather information and photographs for this one specifically, but we utilized navigation tabs. So these are different themes in the report, and we use those to organize the story map. And so each story map was different based off of the report. Not all of the reports were organized the same. And so this was a very well received format. Again, I think it really coincided with the pandemic and just people not being able to go out as much. And here they were able to view different parts of Phoenix on their computer or tablets, anything, smart device with an internet connection. And so through the success of these Phoenix ethnic heritage story maps, this, as mentioned, they won a Governor's Heritage Award. That kind of helped put me on Helen's radar to bring me into the Camp Naco story map. And so I want to show you some of that as well. And with the Phoenix ethnic heritage story maps, there were, as you saw as I scrolled through slowly, there were a lot of properties with individual maps. With Camp Naco, we were creating a story about one military camp, but with a bigger story in Arizona, in American history, and the source material is different. I had a historic property survey report. With here, there was a historic American landscape survey completed by Sarah, articles written by Helen or Rebecca Orozco of the Naco Heritage Alliance. So we had their vast knowledge of the property and history with the Buffalo Soldiers, the CCC, Arizona, and the United States to work with. So there was a lot more information, a lot of different sources to create this story map. And so to tell the important story of this military camp, broader context and history needed to be explained. And while it still uses maps, it focuses more on the narrative and historical timeline of the events that occurred at this location throughout time. And so I stopped here at this image slide. There are also features available to us when creating the story map that weren't available at the time when I was working on the Phoenix story maps, like this image swipe, which is just such a fun tool. It was a feature of the classic story maps, but the newer version, it kind of took a few years for it to catch up, and it was finally implemented. So I was really excited to use this tool. We use it here to show you that water tower photo that Sarah shared, in comparison, a current photo taken through drone imagery by Gerald. So other parts of the map, story map, we also use this feature to show the Zimmerman telegram, which is also mentioned by Sarah. So there's different ways. It doesn't always have to be an image. That was a document that showed it both the coded and decoded image. And so it looks like, oh, there we go. It was not loading as quickly. And so, yeah, there were just a lot different features, a lot more ways to be creative and be creative in the way that we conveyed and shared and visually represented different parts of this story. And so just to generally talk about, the background of our group, we were all working remotely for the most part. Most of this team is based in Southern Arizona. I am based in Mesa and I work in Phoenix. And so we were pretty spread apart, but as a team effort, each individual provided text, photos, videos through their expertise as research historians, filmmakers, graphic designers, and so on. And I brought my GIS experience and my previous experience working with the Phoenix story maps to this team. So just clicking to show you how we incorporated some of these maps. And I'm going to keep scrolling down a bit. And just to mention, we also had a filmmaker in our group, Gerald, who utilized drones to capture beautiful videos of the camp and landscape, as well as fantastic interviews that he coordinated with Sarah and Becky. And so the story map also has a lot of videos incorporated into it. Each section basically has a video, and those videos provide more than information, but like a lot of personal recollection of the camp and the Buffalo soldiers that served there. They bring in a part of the living legacy of Camp Naco through the people it touched and recall its history and importance. And so I'm not going to talk too much about the videos. I know Gerald will go into that further. But I am going to skip. So again, we have some navigation tabs, but this time we use them for these different kind of periods of the camp. And one really important goal of this story map was to have a guided tour to accompany people visiting the camp. And so this part of the story map, the camp here, it was very important that it looked good on a phone. And so we wanted people to be able to access this when they're out on a phone or on a tablet. And so just to scroll through and show you a bit of that. Again, designing this part of the story map, it's going to take us through the different buildings at the site. It looks like this is kind of, okay. I have to actually click on it. It was a little opaque. And so can scroll through and you can see it takes you to each building. We have these videos again of Becky Orozco explaining little background and history about each building. But just again, back to designing this part, it was really important that it looks good on a phone. Some of these images, if you open it on a big desktop screen, it looks a little small. It looks a little, maybe it's zoomed out a little too much, but when you open it on the phone, it looks fantastic. And we really wanted to emphasize that use of this part of the story map. As Helen showed everyone, there's now a sign at the property that has a QR code that allows visitors to pull up the story map. And we encourage anyone out there visiting, you can jump down to this camp tab and use this as you look at the buildings and check out the site. And so I'm going to stop sharing this map and just wanted to mention, the Camp Naco team also presented the story map at both the AGIC conference in Prescott and the Historic Preservation Conference this past year in Yuma. And I guess to toot our own horns, we won a Governor's Heritage Award, as well as the James W. Garrison Award for this story map. And so we're very proud of the end result. Alicia will share, I think she shared the link to this, and so definitely explore it more on your own. So I've showed you what story maps are and how they can look and how they can be used, at least in the context of our preservation related story here. Next, I'm going to show you all how to start a story map and recreate some of the Camp Naco features specifically, just to provide an inside look on how it is to work within a story map. And so let's get started. So first thing, I'm back on my GIS story map main page, and up here in the top right, there's new story. We're going to go ahead and just, we're going to start a new story. There's quick start. These are the different immersive features, immersive styles, I guess, of stories. There's a sidecar, which lets you scroll text past images, that guided tour that I mentioned, and also an explorer map tour. Here, I'm just going to go ahead and start from scratch. And so it's thinking, it's creating that story map. And so this is what we begin with. Here we have a blank cover page. There's your title. It tells you, title your story. Start with a short introduction or subtitle, and then it has my name because it's my account. But I'm going to go ahead and, as I mentioned, just recreate this Camp Naco story map. So rediscovering Camp Naco. And then let's do a little subtitle. And I will just stop there. And we have a short subtitle here. And I'm going to remove my name and put the Naco Heritage Alliance. So we have this title page here. I'm gonna drag my share screen info over to show you some of these tabs at the very top. I hope you can see them. I want to click on this design tab up here, and I'm dragging things. Give me 1 second. Okay, so design, it shows you how you can change the cover style. You can have a minimal cover. You can have a side-by-side, which lets you have some text on one side, a photo on the other. This is what we used for our Camp Naco story map, and I also use this for the City of Phoenix ones. It's just a full image with the text over it. I think it's really, I enjoy it. It really I think it's eye-catching to have just a full screen image there. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that one again. I also mentioned the navigation tabs. You can turn this on or off, but basically once you start creating subheadings, well, actually they'll need to be headings, but once you create different sections, you might want to turn on your navigation tabs if it's kind of a longer story map. This helps users jump through to specific sections if they want to go back through the story map. Here we also have themes. If you use a free account, these are basically going to be the themes that you have to work with, but they're a collection of colors and fonts that work well together. And so you can just select whichever you would like. I'll go ahead and just choose this Mesa one, just as sort of a deserty color there. And browse themes, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a paid subscription, you can create your own themes. And here is where you would be able to access the ones you've saved to your account. So we have that set up. We have the design set up. I'm going to go in here and add a cover image. And I'm just going to use this panorama of Camp Naco. And so now we have a title, a cover page. And as I scroll through, there's that little plus sign. And bear with me while I move my Zoom presentation buttons around. Here we have this plus sign, and this is where you can start adding your content blocks. I'm going to click this open and just kind of show you. These are the basic ones, media, and then the immersive content blocks. And so I'm in my AZGeo account, so I have access to all the subscriber features, basically. Some of the features like audio and image gallery, and also I believe embed, I think they require a paid account. So if you're using a free account, you may not be able to access those features. I'm going to go ahead and just add some text here just to show you. Just put some general information on Camp Naco. So I'm just typing here, Camp Naco lies in the valley of the San Pedro River of southeastern Arizona, between the Huachuca Mountains and Mule Mountains. So I have some text here. From this menu, well, actually, as I highlight this, you see here, there's paragraph text. I can change the type of text here. I can make it a large paragraph, which you can see here. I can make it a subheading, and then I can make it a heading. And if I have that navigation tabs button checked, turned on, this will become a section that we can click through. But just to show you how you can work with the text once you start adding your information to it. And so for the time we have today, I'm going to kind of recreate part of that guided tour. And I'll use the Camp Naco images for this example. So again, going to that add content block, we scroll down and it's an immersive feature and it's the map tour. And here we have options of how we want to create this tour. If you have georeferenced photos or geotagged photos, you can upload them and it will help you quickly create a map based off of the locations in those photos. And you can also use a feature service. And so if you have a GIS layer that you want to automatically help create your guided tour map, you can upload that here. But we're just going to start from scratch and like manually add points. Gives you options with layouts. We chose guided tour for ours. There's the Explorer map, which just kind of shows everything at once, but we preferred the idea of guiding visitors and people on their computer through the camp, building by building. So we'll stick with guided tour again. And then you can also choose to make it media focused, which emphasizes images and a smaller map, or map focused, and we'll stick with map focused. And so we started that, we created the first slide of our guided tour. I'm not sure what that message is showing, so I'm going to close it. And so now we have this blank map, we have this first slide. I'm gonna need to drag. I hope these aren't these Zoom tools are not covering any part of the story map, but I'm gonna keep going. I think we want to get started with the map options. So it automatically defaulted to this really neat antique map. I think this might be what we used in some of our maps. And so if you want to change that, you would go to map options. I'm going to drag this over again. And so there's some different options here. I'm going to leave the configuration alone. And modern antique, that's what we used for our Camp Naco story map. I'll just go ahead and select imagery just to use something different. You can change the point colors either through this slider here, or you can use hex codes. And then initial zoom level is automatic, or you can select a custom zoom level. I'll leave it at automatic for now, but I'm just selecting this and we're going to get started. This is how our base map is going to look for every slide in this guided tour. And so it's starting from a world view basically, and I'm going to get started and add information to my first slide. And so the first slide, I'm going to start with an image, and I think I'll go ahead and just let's put the parade ground and flagpole area. I'm going to use this to start off with just sort of a general overview of Camp Naco. So the parade grounds, and you can put a description. We put text also furthering the storytelling part of this particular section. And so I have some text here I'm looking at. Just put a sentence in here. So you can see it's using those pre-selected fonts from the theme. It's using the pre-selected colors from the theme. So everything's sort of coordinated. So I have information, I have the name, I have the photograph. I could add more photographs if I wanted to. This is where we also added video. But what I'm going to do next is add the location. And so world view extent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Naco. If you have an address, you can type it in there. I think you can add probably Latin long and UTMs and things like that, but Naco, Arizona, it's a fairly small place and I'll be able to find our camp. So it zoomed me into Naco, Arizona, and I know the camp is located right here. So I'm going to keep zooming in. And let's see, I wonder if this is going to kick me out because it kind of did this last time. Yeah, it did. So I added the location. It's for whatever reason, it didn't let me add my point, but I opened it again and now it's saying click to add point. So I'm going to just drop down a point there. This is going to be the first part of our tour. I zoomed into this map, and so I want to use my current zoom level. I like that it's kind of a higher overview, and I might even zoom out further. So once it gets to this slide, it will keep it at this zoomed out extent. And so I like to use that, and I'll add that location. So now we have our first part of our guided tour. Looking at the bottom here, there's one slide. On the right-hand side, there's a plus sign to add new slides. So we can just keep adding them. Once you have your slides in there, if you need to organize them differently, you just drag them over and move them around. If you have too many things in there or decided you don't like the way that something looks, you're going to do it differently, redo it, you can just delete these slides as well. And so I'll delete that blank one. But I'm going to add just a couple more slides. I want to show you the movement within the guided tour. And so let's get the Officers Club in there. And I'll go ahead and title it the Officers Club. And I think I have some information I want to type on that. And so I've typed in here, the Officers Club was divided into 2 rooms with separate entrances to provide segregated areas. And so that is true of this location. I'm going to go ahead and add this point here. And so again, that point 1, it's zoomed out. I'm going to zoom into a little closer into the Officers Club, and I'm just going to drop a point there. I can move my map around, zoom in and out. I'll zoom in a little more. If I don't like where I place the point, I can kind of drag it off somewhere. You can just move it around. You can delete it if you don't want by dragging it to that little trash can icon, but we'll just keep it here on the building. Again, I like the current zoom level that I've set, so I'm going to select that option and I'll add that location. And I'm going to do one more quickly. And I'm almost at my time. I apologize. Let's go ahead and add this one more. These are the non-commissioned officers clubs or quarters. So, oops. And again, I'll just go down and add that location. And I'll choose to set it just right there in the middle. These are the, I'm gonna drag my map. I'm gonna zoom in a little maybe, or maybe I'll zoom out. And so now I have that in there as well. So just to go back to the beginning, show you how this moves with those points you create in your guided tour. As I scroll through, it will take me to each of those buildings the way that I've set the zoom extent, the way that I've placed the map and the points. So yeah, so that's the end of this demonstration. Once you've created your story map, you've added your different features, you can go ahead and publish. As mentioned, you can have it private, you can share it with a group or an organization, or you can make it public to everyone. But we're not going to publish this. And I'm going to stop sharing, Helen, if you want to go back to the slides. And I just have one more slide and I'll quickly go through it so I don't take up everyone else's time. But yeah, when you're done, you can publish your story map to everyone, your organization, your work group. When published to everyone, you can share your link for others to access the story map. The links and story maps stay for as long as you have an active ArcGIS online account. And so just wanted to offer that preview to you and give you some insight on how it looks to work with story maps and how intuitive it is. Thank you, Helen. And how intuitive it is to really work in there. I feel like it's very user-friendly, even if you don't have GIS experience. So again, thank you for your time, and I really look forward to seeing everyone else's preservation stories in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so the story map has already a lot of great information with the maps and the historical narratives and historic photographs. So when we started thinking about what are the things that the video can add to the story map that isn't already there, isn't just kind of repeating. And there were three main areas that we kind of landed on that we could add that would just enrich the story map. And so one of those was interviews, and interviews about some of those, providing more context to the historical events, or in this case, kind of, as imaged here in the upper right, being able to kind of see the uniforms and have someone discuss, why are the patches where they are, what the patches mean, what the colors mean, and really give you more in-depth that would be difficult to do in another medium, or maybe less engaging. The other was about perspectives. So when you arrive to the camp, currently, it's fenced off. And so you can see the buildings from the outside, but you can't really get inside the buildings, or you can't really get to above the buildings or different angles. And so that was something that we could provide through video, is providing new perspectives to the tour. And even if you happen to be at Camp Naco on a day where you're allowed to go in person, we can still provide perspectives with the drone that you still can't get on your own. So video allows us to just add these perspectives that can be used. And they also really allow the tour to be viewed by people not just at Camp Naco, but anywhere. And the other are these kind of rare and special moments that if they're not captured, if they're not on, if we don't video them or take photos of them, there's really no way of sharing them. And so this example at the bottom here, when the mayor of Bisbee talking about all the grant funding coming in and all the possibilities of saving Camp Naco and what that's going to be like. These are these kind of rare special moments that we can capture, add to the story map, and help it enrich it. So maybe let's go ahead and move to the next slide and start the little video, and I'll kind of give you an example of those three elements. I'll give you kind of an example of those. Okay, I'm not sure if the sound is working with that, so I'll just kind of talk through them. But the interviews are with these kind of subject matter experts that if you could get them on site doing tours all the time, that would be fantastic. But that's not realistic. And so what we've done here is we were able to find
now Arizona.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Territory.
Sorry, I couldn't figure.
Really was accelerated by the railroad arriving in Tucson about 1880.
Right. So we get these great subject matter experts. And here is this kind of the section on perspectives. And I think the drone photography is really fascinating for a couple reasons. And one is just seeing the camp in relation to the landscape that isn't, you reveal things that maybe aren't quite as obvious on the ground. And as the drone spins around here, we can see its relation to the border wall, its relation to the valley, how it's kind of central in this valley and it's so close to the border. And we can also see how the border, cuts across the valley in an interesting way. And again, this is the kind of building that if you were standing at the gate, you wouldn't really be able to see this building. So it's both beneficial if you're there on site or if you're not on site, if you can't get access. And then up top here, this camp was state of the art when it was built. And some of these architectural details are really unique to the camp and fascinating. And this allows us to get closer. And again, this is inside that officers club. And that really gets you that what do these buildings actually look like on the inside? And I love that. And again, here you can really see that relation to the border. You can see how close the soldiers were to the border itself. I mean, they were right on the border. And so you can see why all that precautions of setting up barricades for bullets, stray bullets, you're that close.
We'll work in whatever way we can. It's going to be part of a public, private, other partnerships, I'm sure. Our first phase, we hope, is $1.2 million to take care of 2 of these buildings.
As we preserve it, Bisbee preserves its history. People will come here and they can learn about how we contributed to American history.
So that's just a really kind of brief overview of those kind of 3 different modes of video enrichment that we kind of came up with. And as we move forward with Camp Naco, restoring Camp Naco, video is going to allow us to kind of share the progress of the restoration, share the nuances and challenges and the kind of interesting quirks of doing historic preservation work. And one thing I'm kind of interested in is, kind of all this adobe work that's going to go on. And there's so many things about that are just going to be so fascinating. And we're going to be able to share those kind of through video. Also, I think video in general has become one of the main mediums for engaging on the internet. And so I think when people go to a website or they go to your story map, they're almost going to assume and expect that there's going to be some video there. And so I would, I am, of course, biased being a documentary filmmaker. I think film is a great democratic medium for conveying information, but I would strongly consider it. If you were working on developing your own story map, I would think about how am I going to use video? How am I going to incorporate it into my story map? And how can I use it to add layers beyond the text and the historic images? How can I use it to enrich that experience? So I think, yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Casey, I think you're with me, and I think is your video showing you?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So good morning, everyone. I am Jenna Leveille. I am the Deputy State Cartographer for Arizona. And with me is Casey Green. He's the GIS analyst at Arizona State Land, but he is also the AZGeo data curator. So our part of the Camp Naco story is, in my opinion, pretty small. The Camp Naco story is fantastic, and it is a project that we were very happy to support. I wanted to share a little bit today about AZGeo, so you know what the resources are in the state. Helen, either I can share my screen or you can go to the link on your slide. And yeah, and actually I was hoping to show the folks the AZGeo homepage. I think you can get there through your slides as well. So this was an exciting, okay, no problem. Let me go ahead and share. I'm assuming you can see my screen. So AZGeo is the state's geospatial data clearinghouse. This is something that's an initiative that Land has partnered with AGIC, the Arizona Geographic Information Council, to provide to the public and to GIS practitioners across the state. So there is a public facing side, and that's what you see on my screen right now. What this allows is for people to share information and get GIS data, essentially. So the Camp Naco website that we host is through our partnerships page. And that's where you can view the story map and all of the details about Camp Naco. That was the first screen that Helen showed. But to kind of orient you, if you are interested in building your own story maps, you can come to our homepage. And one of the things we provide is a registered account for anyone that is interested. So there are tools here. If you scroll down on the landing page, you fill out this form, you request an account. Casey goes through his workflow and you get a free ArcGIS Online account, essentially. So on the back end, you're able to create story maps and contribute data and build the pieces for your story map at no charge. I'm going to let Casey go into the details a little bit more. And then Casey, if you could share why Camp Naco was really important to us and why we wanted to support it for the community, that'd be great.
And Jenna, right, you get a free account, but also I just want to add that the tools that you saw Crystal use with the themes, all that is available at AZGO, absolutely free. So you can make a really rich looking story map and you know, just a public quality web story map all on AZGO. So I think that's just a great a tool to have. So and so we were really glad to partner with Camp Naco. It's just a cool process, and you know, it just allowed us to show two things: that what you can do with AZGO, and also how much we care about geography and the importance of geography, both from the technical aspect, but the human aspect of geography. And Camp Naco really shows that off. I mean, I said this at the AGIC conference. You know, my dad was a soldier. My dad was served in World War II, you know, in the segregated army, and you know, it was nice that this project allowed me to look at the Buffalo soldiers in Arizona, and it hit me kind of hard because it related me back to my family, and that's what collaboration with, you know, the Camp Naco Alliance has really done for me, myself, and also for AGIC. I believe everyone in AGIC is excited about this and the partnership, and we continue to support it. So that's one little personal caveat that I wanted to share with this. With AZGO, we look forward to continued support of the project. The great thing about ESRI that they keep improving story maps. So you saw where Crystal was saw the slider feature. I believe in the future you'll see even more cooler things you can do with story maps to make this project open to the, presented to the public in new manners and in new fresh ways. So I'm happy to say that.
Thanks, Casey.
Do you want me to add anything else? I could keep going.
I know. I think you did great. I think one of the things that's important for us to share is that when Helen and I met, Camp Naco obviously is a very important part of Arizona's history, and she and I really connected over telling the story. What Camp Naco needed when we met was a home that would be supported into the future and perpetually. So one of the big benefits of hosting it on AZGO is that it has that home, and it is accessible to the public, and it can be shared readily. We provided the tools and the foundational support so that all of the fantastic experts that you've already heard from were able to contribute and collaborate to tell you the story. So I'm excited for you to know about the resource of AZGO. There is all kinds of GIS data available through authoritative data available through the public facing side. but also all of the tools that Casey mentioned and Crystal showed you are also available on the back end. So thank you today for the opportunity to share a little bit about EZGO.
Jenna,
We're happy to answer questions. Go ahead, Casey.
if I could just say one thing, I think AGIC really got behind this. We spotlighted it on our AZGO Spotlight. We have a large community due to our reach, and I got two Jenna's for. Jenna is a national presence in GIS. You know, she's not just Arizona. So we're able to present this on our social media to kind of share the story of Camp Naco. And I think that's the coolest thing ever, where you can take something on our platform that you build and then show it to the world. And that's what we're doing. We're helping share your message and your cause. So I really love that about this. So I'm done, Jenna. Sorry about that. I just had to say it.
Actually, sorry. This is Helen. Let me break in too. The other thing that EZGO did for us was to give us a place for a website. And as we applied for grants, being a volunteer organization, we didn't have a website. And the EZGO people helped us create one in a weekend. And I also have to give them thanks for that.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, Casey provided technical support for the Camp Naco team for questions and the interface, and that being new, and that's support that we provide to anyone who's interested in using the platform. So thank you for the opportunity today. We're happy to answer any questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Well, this is Margaret Hangen. I'll take it as my cue to step in. I remind folks we do have one question in the chat. And I do want to say that I absolutely love your enthusiasm, Casey. It's definitely very palatable. I certainly appreciate that. So let's see, we have one question in the chat. If there are other questions, can you please go ahead and put it in the chat? But I'll start with the first question that we have. It says, this is an exciting format and I can envision many possibilities. Can you give some idea of the overall time and cost involved in the Camp Naco project? And I'm not sure who best can answer that. I'm thinking either Jenna or Crystal.
I think that's a Helen question.
Oh, excuse me, Helen. Yeah. Never mind. I will step back and let you do it.
I will say this was a shoestring project, but we got, I think, 18.5 from Arizona Humanities, and that was our basic budget, and we sort of shared it among the people who were involved. However, as I say, there was sort of a basic center group, and then there was a huge volunteer presence as far as what was actually accomplished. The other thing we ran into, that if anyone is starting a story map, consider the fact that you will have to purchase photo rights. And Arizona Preservation Foundation gave us a $500 stipend for that. So that was our finances. This was very low budget.
Are there any other questions? Or did I miss anything that was in the chat?
I don't see any others, but I did get a direct message and question. So I thought maybe I'll just answer again to everyone. But someone had asked me about just how it looks easier to edit and construct within a story map than a website, and wanting to understand the differences between a story map and a basic website. And so part of my answer was, as an ESRI application, story maps would work easily with their GIS products. So if you have maps or things like that, GIS related stuff, it's easy to incorporate that. But as far as it, the differences between a story map and a website, I think the easiest thing is you don't have to code. The story map does all the hard work for you. You can just add the text you want to add, upload the images you want to upload, or or use links if you're hosting your images elsewhere online. And so that is probably the biggest thing. And I can have Helen provide some insight on the other, I think, ESRI tool that she used to make that AZ Geo Hub website for Camp Naco, because that was more of a website with coding and a little more complex work went into that. Whereas with the story map, we were able to just add what we wanted to put in there and order things in a specific way. But that was part of my demonstration, is just to show that it's not too difficult. I think if you don't have a whole lot of GIS experience and you end up making a story map that maybe doesn't have GIS data in it and it just has photos and images, it's a really easy way to get that up there.
Yes, this is Helen again. I would like to say that with Casey's assistance, putting together a website was also something that could be done in a weekend. And essentially what I did was simply create InDesign slides and drag them into the website. So, and Gerald helped me as well. I should mention that the three of us together managed to create an emergency website when the National Trust questioned whether we really existed because we didn't have a website up to that point. So that again, was one of those stitches in time, and have to thank AZGeo for that.
Yeah, this is Gerald. I'll just jump in too, because I think websites can be really complicated, but oftentimes they work best if they're not. And I think the story map is kind of the same way. You can make it really complicated. There's a lot of depth to those tools, but sometimes simple is better. Just the image, the map, some text. So I would say, yeah, you don't need to overcomplicate it. So I think the tools are really good for that. You can just make something simple, clean, and usually gets the story across better than, too complicated.
Yeah, I would also add that AZGeo has the functionality to support and provide a website interface like what we did for Camp Naco. So while it sits on AZGeo and we have a link to it on our partnership page, Helen and her team actually can just send people directly to the website, so it doesn't appear that it even has anything to do with AZGeo. That functionality is within our foundation of AZGeo, and building that front-facing piece, it does not require coding. It's a drag and drop environment. It's pretty simple. You can make it very complicated, to Gerald's point, if you want, but it's not necessary. So it doesn't really take a ton of expertise to do something like that. And that is a service we provide through AZGeo. There's a lot of help materials on the website or on the internet, as Crystal alluded to in her presentation. So it's totally doable for the novice or the expert. It's something that's pretty easily done.
And just to add on to that, with the help, it's a lot of templates also. We have some in AZGeo that we use where basically, you can pick a lot of templates for your preferred color scheme or the look that you're going for. And then once again, like everyone else said, it's drag and drop. So it's real easy to use. So.
Okay, we did have at least another comment, more so than a question, but I would like to read it. It said, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise. It will be exciting to use these teaching in the preservation of downtown Tucson barrios. So it sounds like another project in the works. A lot of thank yous. And I want to remind everybody there's a lot of information in the chat. There are quite a few links that have been put in the chat, not only to ESRI the product, but also the current story maps, etc. So please do take a look at the chat and take a look at those links that you should be able to just click on and either download or click on, and it should direct you to the location. Are there any other questions? Let's see. There is one in here that says, do you have a story map as a possible treatment option for cultural resource projects? Does anyone, I assume
This
this is
is Helen.
mitigation for effect?
Sure, Helen. This actually is an important question. And Gerald, I think it's also a question for you, because one of the things we are now trying to do at Camp Naco is to document the process, to document the construction process, and also to document the steps we go through as we form this new scholar artist community project that was being supported by the Mellon Foundation. Gerald, would you like to throw something in on that?
Sure. Yeah, I actually think the story maps could work really well, particularly as we move over the next 4 years. It's kind of an ongoing developing story. And I think the story map could really allow us to add layers as they develop and as we discover things and as we discover new links and connections. Like, for example, there seems to be a group of descendants of Buffalo Soldiers in Naco, Sonora, or in Sonora. And that's its own really fascinating story that could link to the Camp Naco story map. And so I feel like there is a really good avenue for connecting these stories, and the story maps provide a really kind of intuitive way of connecting all of those story threads together. Because, Crystal talked about when we started the project, we spent a lot of time outlining because Camp Naco has so many potential story threads you could go down, so many different avenues, and you really need to focus it so that when someone shows up to the camp, you tell them a story and you're not giving them an 8-hour lecture on all the different connections. But at the same time, the story map allows us to add a link or suggest that there is more depth here. And then you could create additional story maps and you could create that depth. And so I think I definitely could see that. The other thing I think about story maps, and this goes back to like what Crystal did in Phoenix, is sometimes you have really great, a really great document you've produced, and maybe it is even available online, but it's not really in a format that's, someone's not going to sit down on a Sunday afternoon necessarily and go through a 100-page document or 200-page, but the story map is the kind of thing that you get the information in small bites, and it kind of it leaves little breadcrumbs to entice you to go further into the story and to delve deeper into the story. And so I think in that way, it's probably a really good way of telling some of these stories that have all of these components, audio-visual components, image components, textual components, but also that they make sense, or you can get the most out of them when you can see them in context of the other information. And so I think the story map does that really well.
But Gerald, and just to add on to that, I think the beauty of it is you're allowed to go to that place with geography. And that's what the story map really does that a PowerPoint presentation may not do. It allows you to add that geographic component to take you there as a viewer of or reader of the document. So I just want to add that on. Being a geographer makes me want to say when people can see the read and look at pictures of Camp Naco, but when you add that map to it, oh, it's right there, right next to Mexico. Only a couple, a stroll away from Mexico. So I'm just wanted to add that little caveat in.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Casey. Because I think sometimes with these stories, and this is something that I'm always trying to get my students to realize this too, that the spatial relationships of things really helps you understand what was going on. And this does that in a really natural, intuitive way. That even the person going through the story map may not even intellectualize, oh yes, this is that distance, but they see it, but they can feel it, and they can see the border wall. They can realize, oh, if I picked up a stone and threw it, it would probably go across the border, right? So those kind of relationships.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions. One was if we wanted to make a story map available offline as well, for instance, on a screen in a museum, can that be done?
Casey, I think that's more our bucket.
Yep.
My understanding is the story maps are not functional offline, but I'll let Casey explain more.
Yeah, no, agreed. It's totally an online. At least I haven't run across any offline story maps in my
Right.
career. So
I do know you can print them into a PDF format or an image format, and the interactive components won't be functional, but that is something you could display in a kiosk kind of mechanism if you didn't have internet connection.
And I thank you for that. And I want to remind, this came up, someone asked if the chat can be saved from this presentation. And just a reminder, yes, it can be. So there is an answer in there, but for those who are not aware, if you click at the 3 little dots at the top of the chat, it'll give you an option to download it. So all those links that are in the chat, you can download into I believe it downloads into a Word document. So you can access that. Looks like there are a couple other questions, but it looks like they were answered in the chat. So unless there is anything else, I want to, okay. It says not if on an iPad. So that is probably correct. You probably cannot download the chat on an iPad. Thanks again to all our presenters. This was hugely informative, I know, for everyone who probably participated, not only about NACO, but also about the importance of the story map as a tool for historic preservation and storytelling. I wanted to also remind everybody that this is the first in a series of webinars in a series that is being put on by Arizona Preservation Foundation, and that this webinar, as well as all the others that we will be putting on in this series, has been recorded, and the link to the recording will be placed up on the Arizona Preservation Foundation website, or sorry, YouTube channel, as well as the website. So look for it in multiple places. And also to remind everybody to be sure to attend our first book club event, which will be this Thursday, February 9th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And the book they'll be discussing, and if you haven't read it, I highly encourage it, How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. Our next webinar will be on March 7th. On studies in historic archaeology in Arizona from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And look for more information. I believe we've already sent out a save the date, and registration information should be available soon if it isn't already on the next one. And yes, that will be recorded. And the information for those will be on our web page and our website. And says it, I'm writing this, it says in the chat. So thank you again. Thanks everybody who decided to participate, and thanks to our speakers. And we hope to see you all, or some of you, at the next presentation. Thank you.